Hi, I'm Mara Webster with Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we are so thrilled to be joined by Taylor Russell, who is the writer and director of Silk Road, and Darrell Britt-Gibson, who plays the character Rayford in the movie. And Taylor, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the way that you really constructed the character of Ross within the film, who was the founder of Silk Road, because one of the things I thought was fascinating was that you talked to so many people that knew him, even though you didn't have access directly to him. And that one of the central questions was, did he really believe that what he was doing was actually creating freedom and creating something that was a really good thing to have in the world, and not necessarily thinking about the negative consequences of some of it. And the fact that everybody said yes is so telling of who he was and what he believed in. So how did that really inform the way that you constructed him as a central character?
Well, it's a great question, and it was a really interesting outing because that was the first question I had. Like, was this a mask? Was this some sort of libertarian bomb the system ethos? This drive for individual liberty above all things. Was that, something that he was sort of doing for the crowd, or was that fundamentally who this guy was? And Ross's ex-girlfriend, Julia V, who's portrayed in the film by Alexandra Shipp, the real Julia was a consultant, and so that was one of the very first questions that I asked her sitting down to write the script. And, as we began to get closer to production and vetting it, and she said, literally from the jump, from the first time she met him, like at a bar, he was there, like, blasting, broadcasting his worldview. And then it was just a cornerstone of who this guy was, and really like driving him in a fundamental way, which to me struck me as a very interesting departure point for a character, because in a way, this is somebody who goes into it as a true believer, as a dreamer, as a bit of a naif who thinks, okay, I'm going to change the world and I'm going to make my mark in it. And along the way, somewhere, things go crazily awry and he gets taken down, into this very dark descent.
Yeah. And then Darrell, obviously Tiller did such extensive research before making the movie. And so I wanted to ask you about kind of the access or the conversations that you had with Tiller in terms of research that related to your character, so that you could really uncover a lot of depth beneath even just the scenes that we have in the movie for him.
Yeah, Tiller, being the documentarian that he is, has crossed paths with a lot of different individuals, and one of them was a friend of his who I don't want to mess up what his title was. I don't even think I want to. I'm not speak
Yeah, let's
about
keep
what.
let's keep let's keep it
Yeah, yeah,
quiet.
yeah, 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 yeah. I'm not gonna say much about that, but I was able to have conversations with somebody who gave me an insight sort of into the world, and speaking with him sort of informed me sort of about that, what goes on in that type of world, because it's something that I don't, yeah, that's not my world. And so it was it's fascinating speaking to him. And then, with Tiller being who he is and how he is, he allowed for, so much space to sort of bring, my own juice to the table. And that, which is a beautiful thing, and so freeing as a creative. And so that's sort of, it's an amalgamation of things, but that's sort of the core of what you
Mhm.
see, the Rayford you see on screen.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point that you bring up, because I think this is something that, like, we tried to do all throughout. Is you did a combination of bringing yourself to the part, right? What your knowledge of Baltimore, your knowledge of the sneaker world, whatever it is, and so that there's an authenticity of you infusing yourself into this character, and yet at the same time, we had access to, through, as Darrell was saying, through the documentary work, to like long-term informants. You have these weird kind of complicated fraught relationships with their handlers, and so being able to both kind of extract that from reality as well as to infuse the personal to it was something that we kind of tried to do all throughout at every turn.
Yeah. And I love that you just brought up the fact that he's such a huge sneakerhead, because, that tells us a lot about his personality. It shows us a lot about something that he's hugely, hugely passionate about. So are you also a huge sneakerhead, being that Tiller was just mentioning that you brought a lot of your knowledge in that world, and how did you really want to infuse that aspect into him?
Yeah, I'm Mara, unfortunately, disgustingly so, a sneakerhead. I have rooms dedicated to sneakers. It's bad. Um, I don't think it's it's something that you maybe think you will shake at some point, and you just don't shake it. Once a sneakerhead, always a sneakerhead. But it was such a beautiful thing, in addition to the character, because there is this attention to detail, being a sneakerhead, and about like, and sort of, the specificity of like, yeah, it's a, it's a Jordan 1, but it's like, oh, but I want the Carolina blue one that came out this year, because you can have sort of like, like, you look at a shoe, if you don't know, and you're like, oh, that's the same shoe, and it's like, no, but like the swoosh is angled differently on this version that got released in 2018 as opposed to the one in 2015. But to the naked eye, you're like, well, it's just the same shoe. And the attention to detail is something that Rayford, in his line of work, and how he lives his life, is something that's so key, because you gotta be able to pay attention to the details, because your life could be on the line if you don't.
Mhm. And with those details, Tiller, you pull so many great visual details and character details into a lot of the supporting characters, and you never allow someone to just exist on screen for a moment as a vehicle for the narrative. You really flesh them out, and whether it is the fact that Rayford's a huge sneakerhead, and there's details like that. There's a cello in his space. To Curtis, where he's got the tiny pet. There's a plate of donuts, and all of these things give us all these clues. So between the script writing process and figuring out a lot of those production details, how did you really work to ensure that there was always this really fully fleshed composite with every single one of the characters in that way?
Really, really astute observation, and a great point. And I think that's sort of some of the great joy of it, right? Is, in the writing and research process, when you're lucky, there are all these weird details. So for example, the character played by Paul Hauser, Curtis Clark Green, in actuality, he had it was a Chihuahua that he had. But as we sort of began to talk about it, I was talking to Paul, and I was like, man, a Chihuahua is going to be like yapping over lines, like that's going to be a nightmare. And at a certain point, Paul's like, ferret, bro. And as soon as he was like ferret, it was like, okay, that unlocked the character. And then, another detail is he was like, what if he's a mumbler? Instead of, because he doesn't have anybody to talk to, he's talking to himself all the time. And so those little details, kind of unlocking the character, or what Darrell's saying about the kind of meticulousness and precision that's required in the sneakerhead game versus, as applied to that same level of kind of precision applied to the dope game, or his knowledge of, the inner workings of the dark web in its earliest phases. It gives a layer of complexity, hopefully, and nuance to it, where you're feeling like, oh, what's the movie? Like, what's the entire movie that Darrell's in? Because like, I want to see that one.
Yeah. And I love that your journey of discovery, particularly with Ross, it wasn't even just about the details online that you could find, the articles, that it was also about the feeling of this character as well. And that one of the things that you did as part of your writing process was to go physically to some of the spaces and spend time in like coffee shops that he would frequent, or the library where the arrest happens, and really just feel out that space and think about what that experience would have been like. So how did that lead to a lot of the tone setup and character details in a lot of those scenes from the time that you spent there?
Yeah, another really interesting point that you raise, which is I'm a big believer in marinating yourself in the environment, because essentially, when you're sitting down to write, you're having to enter into somebody else's story, right? And you're with your kind of like whole consciousness and sort of mind and heart. And so a great way of doing that is like, geography is character, in a fundamental way. And so being in those places and taking them in, even if you decide to take liberties, for example, the sci-fi section of the Glen Park Library in San Francisco, where Ross was arrested, when I actually walked into the real location, and had these like tiny low ceilings, fluorescent lights, and I was like, this is not a movie, this sucks. It needs to be like big and cavernous and have some sort of like scope and cinema to it. And so that by the time we end up creating that scene, it is this sort of like cathedral like or university like building where we put it. But I felt like part of that is going in and sort of finding you're looking for the essence, you know what I mean, which is or the kind of emotional or spiritual truth of something. So that was always the guiding light, where even where we're departing from the quote unquote quotidian facts of something, we're trying to stay true to the spirit of it.
Yeah. And then Darrell, I wanted to talk about the dynamic that you create on screen with Jason Clarke, because, the two of them are so fascinating to watch in terms of the power balance when someone has a piece of information that the other person needs and how that flows back and forth. And this isn't the first time that they've spent time together, even though we're witnessing it as audience members for the first time. He's been an informant to Rick before. So did the two of you have many conversations, or
Okay.
did you self-construct a lot of backstory about what their previous history was in order to really shape the specifics of the dynamic that we see in that power play?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, wow. I mean, Jason is just so awesome to work with, just in general. And I think when you start there, everything is gonna just flow so effortlessly. I think on the surface, Jason and I is a strange pairing. And I think that's part of what Tiller, like, I know I'm in his diabolical mind, and I know that Tiller was like, oh yeah, Jason Clarke and Darrell. Yeah, let's see what just happens with that. And it's so fun, and it's so incredible that he put us together, because I like really like enjoy Jason as a person now. And it was, because we were so different, but there's just so many things, are so many similarities between us. And also he's this, wealth of knowledge in terms of the industry and just in life, because he's been in the game for a lot longer than me. And so being able to tap into that, and I don't know, I feel like we saw each other in a very, on a very special level. And that helped, and Tiller is so beautiful at letting us sort of just create from that. I think Tiller would get a kick out of, sometimes me and Jason would just be saying, I don't even know. There's probably stuff on the cutting room floor that is like,
It's great. It's amazing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I think that, like, having that, having a director who sort of fosters that type of space where you can create that type of, environment, it really does help. But also Jason being who he is, and I being who I am, and us not sort of trying to stray away from who either of us are as individuals to make this thing. It was really special.
And there's
There's
there's a
a
sorry.
no, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, you go first.
Well, I was just going to say, what was so fun about watching the two of those guys work together was, with Jason, there, like, he played it with this kind of like insane volatility, where at like any moment you're like, is this guy going to reach out and kiss that person, or like hit him over the head with the butt of his pistol, and you're like, you never know what he was going to do moment to moment. And then Darrell was just so sort of like smooth and smart and like laid back, just sort of like clocking and observing it. So literally just sitting there like bearing witness to the dynamic that they brought to it was such a joy to watch. These really distinctive performers in this fascinating, unlikely pairing. And like, okay, who's going to hit the ball now?
Yeah. And also when you look at all of the scenes that you have, it really is a two-hander for you. You're working singularly with him throughout the entire movie. So what was the difference in terms of the dynamic that you were able to create and the intimacy that you had as a result from the fact that he was your singular scene partner throughout the entire movie?
I think it allowed for there to be, like, every day there a growth in the relationship that we're creating, in the space, because it's just the two of us. So he's the only other person that I'm working with every day. Like, I have scenes with nobody else except for Jason, and that's so awesome, because it was like, every day you're going to see the same person, but every day you get a different version of people, just in general, right? We're all, on different days we're going to be different, right? But so it was such an awesome experience to have this thing where I'm going to only see Jason, and Jason's only going to see me. And so, like, the fact that this beautiful sort of like crazy relationship was built between the two of them, I think it really helps, in to the payoff, when at that moment where he's like, oh, like, you are different, right? Like, you actually are, maybe you are really my friend, right? But that's being built on a real level. So I am looking at Jason differently, like, hey man, like, don't, like, you know what I mean? Because I don't want to see anything happen to Jason at this point. So it's really an interesting thing to be able to just sit with one other actor and sort of like the two of you just are creating this thing. And that's a testament to T, allowing us to, giving us the space to do that.
Yeah.
There's a funny thing about partners, that you guys sort of immediately clocked and picked up on, because in a way, when you look at partners that are there spending all their day to day, there is this like almost like husband and wife kind of like vibe to it, and in a weird way, like these two are partners, you know what I mean? The power dynamic screwed up, they're doing shit they aren't supposed to be doing, but like nonetheless, like these are the guys that are there and have known each other and have that deep relationship. And so watching the two of them, craft that and crack that was such a joy.
Yeah. And then Taylor, I also wanted to ask you about working with and directing Nick Robinson, because his character requires such an internal performance a lot of moments. He's got to make it look visually dynamic when he's just typing words on the computer and building a website and reading messages that people are sending him. And he's so good as a performer at taking really minute details and really kind of leaning into them. So how do you feel that the fact that that is such an ability and what you were asking him to do really allowed you to find a lot of deeper layers with the character of Ross because of that skill set?
He's such a pleasure to work with because he's so available and kind of open and sweet and likable, and that was what attracted to me to him as a performer. And I remember one of the very first scenes. So we shot the movie almost as if it were two separate movies. There was the Jason Clarke, Darrell half of the movie, which we shot all of, and then we eventually had a brief sort of spillover and then segued to the Nick Robinson, Alexandra Shipp half of the movie. And it really was like shooting, two separate films together. And I remember that first day seeing Nick, and it was a simple scene where he's just in his apartment in San Francisco, and he's literally just interacting with the computer, for which, there is this, but there's an amazing amount of radical internal conflict that's happening within him. And I could see that the camera could see the depth of his consciousness and mind and what was going on there. And I just thought, wow, this guy's going to be a real pleasure to work with, because if you can construct that internally, I think it only takes the smallest thing to really hook you into it, as a viewer.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to talk about the use of technology within the film, because it wasn't that many years ago, but also there's been huge shifts in technology, and you use a lot of moments in the dialogue to really kind of like bring us back to that time period. If it's dialing something before you call someone so they don't know who it is, for example. But even thinking about exactly what model of iPhone it was that he would have had, and also kind of needing to explain a few things a little bit. There's people who really understand Bitcoin, and it's still a little bit of a shrouded mystery for others. So as you were writing the script and figuring out a lot of those details, how did you determine what was a necessary tool or like a nice little embellishment to the narrative that you were telling, and where the details were that weren't really moving the plot forward and you could just leave out?
Yeah, another really, really smart question. You're having to like write and sort of deliver on multiple different levels, right? So there are the people that know nothing about this story, don't give a damn about the tech, and are just there for the drama and the arc of the characters. And then there are the people that were sort of really geeked on the story and really obsessively followed each twist and turn and detail in it. And you're constantly having to calibrate playing to both of those levels, where you need the specificity and precision as the website evolves from underground brokers to the earliest iterations of Silk Road to how the interface evolves over time, all of that stuff. And there was kind of amazing archival materials of what had been entered into the evidentiary record of screen grabs and stuff like that the feds had taken. So there was access to all of that. And then we had to kind of map it against a timeline of like, ooh, okay, so this is like iPhone 3 era. And then like source the iPhone 3, make sure the damn thing's working on the day, and then kind of track the evolution. So it was both painstaking, but also kind of, there's a pleasure in spinning the knobs in a fine-tuned way.
Yeah. And to that point of some people coming in knowing all of the minutiae and all of the details, and some people not knowing anything about the story of Silk Road and its genesis, did you weigh up the decision as to whether to open with a scene right before he's going to be arrested, which eventually we tail into later in the film, because then it becomes less about what's going to happen and the how and the why. But was there any discourse that you had with yourself about whether you wanted to include that at the beginning or leave it as a little bit of a mystery for people who didn't know?
It was a big kind of like early question of like, how much do we want to tip our hand as to where this is going? Because anybody that knows the story knows the end, right? Knows he gets busted, knows he gets whatever. Anybody that doesn't necessarily know the end. But then you look at something like, Titanic. Well, everybody knows the boat's going down. And in a weird way, there's sort of like an added pleasure to the inevitability of it. It's less what happens as how it happens and to whom and how that emotionally impacts you. So at the end of the day, we made the calculation. Hopefully what you're vesting in is like these characters and the stakes for them, as opposed to the card turns of the plot.
Mm-hmm. And then Darrell, obviously a huge part of your character's place in the movie is the fact that he understands all of this technology. He already knows what the dark web is. He's the person who introduces Rick to Bitcoin. Um, did you use a lot of Tiller's, kind of going back to that research in figuring out where he would have learned all of that, what it was that he was doing himself on the dark web with a lot of Bitcoin to begin with, to be able to share that information, or what did you construct as the backstory for him in that respect?
There's a lot. One thing I did was that I sort of followed around one of my best friends who's in the tech world and just sort of like wanted to be a fly on the wall, because I'm awful at computers. Like it's amazing that I'm on this Zoom, or like I don't even know how I got here. Um, but no, I really just wanted to sort of see like what his day to day was like, and just sort of watching him, around his computer. And then I had some friends who have, gotten into Bitcoin and sort of just getting into doing a deep dive of sort of getting my knowledge on Bitcoin. I bought some Bitcoin just to kind of get into the
I hope you kept
that
it.
world.
It's going off right now, man.
I did keep it. I did keep it. That's why I'm actually doing this Zoom from my mega yacht right now. So I apologize if the service is choppy as the waters are. But yeah, I think a lot, and then Tiller being able, Tiller is such a wealth of knowledge, and his attention to detail is what's so incredible. And so you can have a question for Tiller, and he'll have 2-3 answers for you, And so I would just pick his brain about his knowledge of this world in particular, being the world being the tech of it, and the Bitcoin and all of that. So it made my job a lot easier, but also just kind of leaning into doing the research and making sure I'm present in that world, so that I have an understanding of what is happening in the world.
Yeah. And on the flip side, Taylor, you have the character of Rick, who his understanding of technology is incredibly rudimentary. And I actually wanted to ask about the tone in which you approach that, because you actually made the very conscious choice to never play it for humor. You're not playing for laughs that he doesn't know how to plug a camera in and how to upload pictures, or that he's going on YouTube and watching videos on how to use the internet ultimately and how to click a mouse on a computer. Were there any moments where you were ever tempted to lead into the slightly potential comedic side of someone, or you really just wanted to be a discourse about what technology was and how people were accessing it at the time?
In a funny way, what was kind of like what cracked me up personally was like Jason being pissed off was just inherently funny. And so there was like a straight man version of it that like every time you see him kind of like losing his shit and the rivets getting loose, it was inherent. Like he didn't have to lay it on sort of in a broad way for it to be enjoyable, because it's like, I don't know, you have these people in your lives, whether it's your dad or your grandmother, whoever it is, who it's just like, this is a foreign object. Never in a million years will I understand how this instrument works. And so, when you get this guy that's like out of step with the times, out of step with the technology, but has this like deep old school analog street knowledge, the grinding of those gears was the joy of that character for me.
And there's also the fact that, cybersecurity and a lot of what they were investigating with him was such new technology that even the people investigating him didn't fully understand what they were looking for yet, which you really touch upon well within the movie. What was the journey of discovery to really understand what their understanding of this would have all been at the time?
Well, I'm a big believer in technical consultants and surrounding yourself with the sort of smart people that really know their stuff. And it's not so much that I have this incredibly sophisticated, nuanced understanding of it, but I've got like a great phone sheet and like know how to get to the people that do. So, I had buddies that were, long-term DEA agents. So I would be able to ask them even little details like, okay, as you're walking by the monitors, what's the logo that's up? As you're passing through, or like what levels of sort of like password setup do you need to have, so that there was this kind of precision. And then I also had access to this kind of old school black hat turned white hat, dark web hacker who kind of had lived through all this stuff on both sides of the law initially, as a operator, and then later working for the federal government and whatever else. So he really knew it from both sides intimately, and could constantly sort of like vet and calibrate and adjust the accuracy of all that stuff.
Yeah. And then I additionally wanted to ask you about the voiceover narration that you had, Nick, do for the movie, because almost every single thing word for word is actually taken from journals that he wrote, things he posted online, messages that he shared back and forth with people. And so what was the point at which you realized that that voiceover narration was going to be so true to form and verbatim of things that he had said and put forth into the world about himself?
Well, that was one of the most interesting things, I think, about Ross. Is I knew that I would not have access to him. In the early stages of it, when I first sat down to write, he was locked up in MCC New York, hadn't gone through trial, sentencing, the appeals process, soliciting a pardon, all those things that were to come. And yet there was this amazing archive of materials that were in his voice, right? There was the public posts as Dread Pirate Roberts, there were the diary entries, there were the chat logs. And so at a certain point, I realized, wait a minute, I'm sitting here with this like gold mine of this guy's, his portrait of himself. In some fundamental way. And he had a sense very early on, as you read those diary entries, he says something along the lines of, I have a feeling that one day, a book will be written about my life, and it would be good to have a detailed account of it. And so there was this degree of self-awareness of the journey he was on that I thought, like, man, that's a gift from the universe. You have to like take that and harvest it, and then, bend it to sort of graft it onto the right places so that you're hopefully enjoying the interior emotional journey of the character, or on for the ride anyway. But it was a great gift, like taking that stuff and puzzling it, and then working with Nick. He would lay down long versions of it, and then we would recut it in the edit room, sort of cut it down, and sort of hopefully try to get the exact right amount to put you inside his shoes and inside his consciousness at the pivot points in the movie.
Yeah. And then lastly, for both of you, I wanted to ask each of you about what the biggest challenges were that you felt or experienced in the making of this movie, but also on the flip side, what you feel you really had the opportunity to learn about your craft as well. Maybe starting with you, Darrell.
The biggest challenge. What was the biggest? It. I don't really know. I can't really say that there was. It's always hard for me to say there are challenges when you are, waking up, doing what you love every day, and I really am a big believer in the blessing and the privilege that it is to be doing what I do, and how this is not a right. So, I really try to stay away from pinpointing the challenges of something that I know so many people, would love to be in my position. So I try to stay away from that. But I think the biggest thing I learned from the craft. I mean, it's just another example of working, being blessed to work with a director that I really, really enjoy, that I think is really just a really good person. And I have been so incredibly blessed in this short career so far, to have worked with some people that are like, I don't even know how this is happening. It's divine. But you know, again, just the benefits of working with people that really love what they're doing. You know, Taylor really loves what he's doing, and he really believes in the work that he's creating. And that's the kind of energy that you'll go to bat for any day. You know, so I just, you know, hope I continue to be blessed to do that and to work with the people who actually care about the stories they're trying to tell.
Beautifully said, man. And I really feel the same way, in the sense that, you know, in a way, it's all incredibly challenging. Sitting down to, like, you know, write a script, like from day one, like blank page, staring at it, like, how are we going to fill this in? How are we going to be true to the story? How are we going to, you know, get this thing cast? How are we going to sort of make it through, you know, the time constraints and the ticking clock of, you know, more time, you know, to work and do whatever, you know, because that's always the thing. But you know, so on the one hand, everything is hard. On the other hand, it just feels like, what a gift, you know, that we have the opportunity to sort of do this with an amazing group of people and collaborators and partners, and just, you know, having had the chance to sit there and share those days with Darrell and Jason, or Nick and Alex, and, you know, everybody in there. It was just such a you know, such a profound pleasure to be surrounded by such talented people bringing their all to it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the movie. And I'm so excited for you that it's getting out into the world, and people are getting the opportunity to discover it. And thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you
so much, Mara. Seriously, have a great weekend.
Take care. Stay safe.